Rain streaked the platform windows as Marta waited, groceries in hand, just another face among hundreds. She kept to herself, believing quiet days drew no attention. But everything changed the moment two officers stopped her. No explanation, just cold metal around her wrists. The crowd shifted, some curious, others turning away. Marta's only thought was of her mother waiting at home, and the city that never seemed to notice people like her. Then boots sounded on tile, a man in uniform, posture forged by years of command, eyes sharp with understanding. General Singh didn't shout. He simply stepped forward, asked a question, and, in a single moment, altered the fate of everyone watching. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And once the story ends, let your heart decide how this one should be rated. Rain drummed softly on the tin roofs above the city, washing the color from the morning. The train station pulsed with its ancient rhythm shoes squeaking across marble, voices echoing beneath high, soot-stained rafters, the metallic clang of a departing carriage. In the midst of all this, Marta Vasilia moved invisibly, as she always did, her world condensed into the shape of a battered green tote bag and the promise of a warm apartment 3 stops away. She'd been up since 4 a.m., her hands already raw from scrubbing floors at the bakery. The smell of yeast and burnt sugar still clung to her coat. Marta had a way of slipping through crowds, shoulders tight, eyes down, the city's current carrying her almost without resistance. She was a familiar face to the vendors at Platform 7, the ones who nodded but never asked questions. To them she was just another commuter, another story they would never hear. But if you watch closely, you'd see the small things. The way she pressed a coin into the palm of the old flower seller by the turnstiles, how she wrapped a stray dog in her scarf on icy mornings, the quiet smile she offered the conductor who always looked exhausted. Marta's kindness was not loud. It was the steady kind, like rain never noticed until it was gone. She thought of her mother, Galina, waiting in their apartment above the laundromat. Galina's health had been fading for years. Lungs that rattled in the night, hands that trembled when she tried to grip a spoon. Marta moved through her days as if collecting small mercies. A half-price loaf, a forgotten newspaper for her mother to read, a prescription filled just before the pharmacy closed. Every act was a stitch in the frayed fabric of their lives. There were moments rare and precious when Marta allowed herself to hope. She would pause at the window while her mother slept, watching the city lights flicker through the fog. She'd remember Odessa, the apartment they'd left behind, her father's laughter, the taste of apricots in summer. But hope she'd learned was a fragile thing. It could be broken by a single letter from the landlord, a missed shift, a cough that wouldn't stop. So she let it pass, turning her focus to the concrete task of survival. Today was supposed to be simple. Pick up the bread, collect her mother's medicine, and take the 7:45 train home. She moved through the station on automatic, nodding at the familiar faces, careful not to linger. The city was a living thing, sometimes a friend, more often a judge. Marta had learned to step lightly, to blend in. If you stay quiet, her mother always said, life will leave you undisturbed. But cities remember the quiet ones, even if only as background noise. At the newsstand, the vendor, a woman with tired eyes and a habit of humming old pop songs, slipped Marta a small bag of bruised apples. For your mother, she said, voice low, as if kindness was contraband. Marta smiled, pressing her hand over the woman's in silent thanks. Children ran past, chasing each other around the benches. Their laughter cut through the gloom, and Marta let herself smile. Once, she'd wanted children of her own, had imagined a kitchen filled with warmth and stories, a life less precarious than the one she'd inherited. But dreams she knew were dangerous. They could make you reckless, could trick you into believing you deserved more than you had. A sudden commotion drew her attention. 2 police officers moved through the crowd, their uniforms dark against the station's pale tile. Marta stepped aside, instinctively shrinking into herself. The officers' faces were blank, their conversation inaudible beneath the station's noise. For a moment, Marta felt the old fear rise, irrational but insistent, a relic from another country, another era. She shook it off. She had nothing to fear. She was just a woman with groceries, a daughter with responsibilities. As she waited for her train, she looked around at the other faces, tired men in suits, mothers balancing bags and children, teenagers with headphones and secrets. Each carried their own burdens, invisible as air. The station clock chimed. Marta checked her watch, calculating the time until her mother's next dose. She shifted her weight, feeling the ache in her knees, the familiar pull of fatigue. Behind her, a group of students argued cheerfully about football. In front of her, a businessman barked into his phone, his voice sharp and brittle. Marta existed between these worlds, never quite part of either, always observing, always just out of frame. She thought again of her mother's advice. Life is a river, Marta. Don't fight the current. Let it carry you, and you'll find your shore. Marta had tried to believe it, though some days the current felt more like a riptide. The rain outside intensified, blurring the city into watercolor. Marta closed her eyes, listening to the rhythm of the drops on the glass. She remembered a childhood story, her father's voice soft and steady. Kindness is like rain, little one. It falls on everyone, even those who never ask for it. A bell rang, signaling the approach of her train. Marta gathered her things, straightening her coat. She took a deep breath, steadying herself for the day's next challenge. The world she knew could change in an instant, a lesson learned too many times. As the train pulled into the station, Marta stepped forward, ready to disappear into the crowd once more. She did not see the officers watching her, did not notice the tension rising in the air, did not sense that today the current was about to shift. But the city, alive and listening, held its breath. The station was a living organism, fluorescent lights flickering like synapses, footsteps thumping in overlapping heartbeats, the air thick with the scent of wet wool, burnt coffee, and a faint ozone tang from the rain. Marta Vasiliev, ordinary and overburdened, waited by the arrivals board, her bag of groceries pressed tight to her chest, the morning's small victories already slipping through her fingers. She was thinking of her mother's medicine, the bread still warm, the ache in her knees, mundane details that could anchor a mind against the undertow of worry. That's when she saw them. 2 police officers, uniforms crisp and dark, moving through the crowd with the purpose of sharks slicing through a school of fish. She tried to look away, to become invisible, but their gaze found her. "Ma'am," the taller one called, his voice neutral but edged with something she couldn't name. Marta's heart thudded. She hadn't done anything wrong, but guilt is a reflex for those who have spent their lives on the margins. She turned, her voice a careful murmur. "Yes? Step over here, please." The officer gestured toward a quieter patch of tile, away from the main flow of commuters. A few heads turned. The city's jury, always ready for spectacle, began to gather. Some faces flickered with curiosity, others with the cold relief of not being the one chosen. A teenager lifted his phone, filming the encounter with the blank detachment of someone who'd seen too much already. The second officer, younger, eyes darting, said, "Do you have identification, ma'am?" "It's in my bag," Marta replied, reaching with shaking hands. She fumbled with the zipper, the edge of a bread loaf poking out. "Ma'am, keep your hands where we can see them," the first officer cut in. His tone was still neutral, but the air around him seemed to tighten. Marta froze. "Of course, I'm sorry. It's just my mother's medicine." "We need to ask you a few questions," the younger officer said, softer now but with a nervous glance at his partner. "What's this about?" Marta's voice trembled, the crowd's eyes hot on her skin. "We received a report. You match the description of a suspect involved in an incident this morning," the older officer explained, not quite meeting her gaze. Marta's mind reeled. "No, I've just come from the bakery. I haven't—" "Please turn around, read," the officer instructed. A hush fell over the platform. Marta blinked, uncomprehending. There's been a mistake, please." "Turn around, ma'am, now." She did as she was told. hands raised slightly, bag slipping from her arm. The cuffs were cold, clinical, biting into her wrists with a finality that vibrated all the way to her bones. The sound, a sharp mechanical click, echoed across the station, silencing even the announcements for a beat. Someone gasped. Someone else muttered, "Just another one," as if this was as inevitable as the rain. The bread rolled out of her bag, bumping against the toe of a businessman who looked down, frowned, and then quietly nudged it back with his umbrella. The apples scattered, one splitting open, its scent bleeding into the air. Marta's cheeks burned. She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. "Please, I need to get home. My mother, she's alone." "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent," the older officer recited, his voice flat and practiced. "Anything you say can and will be used against you." The crowd shifted, some faces hardening into judgment, others melting with pity. The woman at the newsstand pressed her lips together, her hands trembling as she stacked magazines. A porter nearby, who Marta had once helped find his lost keys, watched with sorrow furrowing his brow, but said nothing. Marta felt the world tilt, the edge of panic rising. She looked at the officers, at the faces around her, searching for someone, anyone to see her. "This is a mistake," she whispered, but the words were lost in the station's endless noise. The younger officer picked up her bag, now scattered and damp, and glanced at the medicine bottle. His expression flickered, uncertain. "Sarge, maybe we should—" "Protocol," the older officer interrupted. "She matches the description. We'll sort it at the station." He didn't look at her. No one really did. As they began to lead Marta away, the crowd parted in a hush. Some stepped back as if injustice was contagious. Others looked down, guilt blooming in the corners of their eyes. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Why are they taking her?" Marta stumbled, her legs unsteady. The station, which had always been a blur of strangers and noise, now felt like a stage. The city was a jury, and her verdict had been read without trial. "Excuse me, officers." The voice was sharp, commanding, and cut through the air like a blade. The officers paused, surprised by the authority in that tone. Through the crowd, a man in an army uniform stepped forward. General Ajay Singh, his medals discreet but unmistakable, his bearing unmistakably that of someone used to being obeyed. He approached, his gaze level. "What is the charge?" The older officer bristled. "Security matter, sir. She matches a suspect." "Your evidence?" Singh asked, voice calm but steely. The younger officer hesitated, glancing at his partner. "We haven't checked her ID yet." Singh raised an eyebrow. "Then I suggest you do so now, in front of all these witnesses." The crowd, hungry for a new drama, leaned in closer. Marta's heart hammered in her chest. The general's eyes met hers, not cold or judging, but piercing, searching for the truth beneath the fear. The older officer, now aware of the attention, opened Marta's bag. He pulled out the medicine, the bread, her battered wallet. He checked the ID, compared it to his phone. A pause, the tension thickened. The officer's jaw tightened. "It appears there's been a mistake." A wave of relief shuddered through Marta. Her knees nearly buckled. The older officer unlocked the cuffs, not meeting her eyes. The younger one muttered an apology, his cheeks red. The crowd murmured, the story already shifting. Now it was about the army man, the mistake, the near injustice averted. The general turned to Marta, his voice gentle now. "Are you all right?" She nodded, tears bright in her eyes. "My mother." He nodded. "Come, I'll walk you out." As Marta gathered her scattered belongings, the newsstand woman came over, pressing the bag of bruised apples into her hands. "For your mother," she whispered, voice trembling. The porter, emboldened now, stepped forward. "You helped me once. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." Marta managed a small, grateful smile. The city, for a moment, felt less like a jury and more like a family. The general escorted her toward the exit, the crowd parting. The officers, chastened, faded into the background. As they reached the doors, Marta looked up at the general. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. He smiled, a tired but genuine smile. Sometimes all it takes is one voice willing to ask the right question. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city lights glimmered on the wet pavement, and for the first time all day, Marta felt seen. The clatter of the handcuffs still echoed across the marble floor as the officers led Marta away, her dignity unraveling with every step. The station, alive with the pulse of morning, had developed a hush of silence that felt unnatural, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Most eyes slid away from the scene, but a few lingered, uncertain, disturbed. Even the rain seemed to pause against the glass. At the far end of the platform, a pair of boots stepped from the arriving train. Black, polished, military, each footfall measured and certain. Behind them, the rest of the world blurred. A sea of umbrellas, 1,000 stories in motion. But to those who noticed, the arrival of General Ajay Singh was like a tremor, subtle, but enough to promise change. Singh's posture was a study in composure. He wore his years like armor, shoulders straight, hands folded behind his back, eyes scanning the crowd with the calm vigilance of someone who had learned to see what others missed. His uniform was understated, but the metals above his heart glinted in the station's cold morning light, a quiet testament to a life spent in service. He did not rush. Instead, he watched first the officers, then the woman between them, head bowed, hands cuffed, groceries and apples scattered at her feet. Something about the scene pulled at him. Perhaps the memory of his own mother, once stopped at a checkpoint in another country for the simple crime of looking out of place. Or perhaps it was the way Marta stood. Not defiant, not defeated, but heartbreakingly still. He approached, each step deliberate, his presence gathering the drifting attention of commuters. As he drew near, the older officer straightened, his hand tightening on Marta's arm. "Excuse me, officers," Singh said, his voice calm but unmistakably authoritative. "May I ask what's happening here?" The older officer, Sergeant Patel, bristled at the interruption. "Routine security, sir. We're investigating a suspect matching a description." Singh's gaze was steady. "Have you confirmed her identity?" The younger officer, Constable Rao, shifted his weight, glancing at the badge on Singh's chest. "We haven't run her ID yet, General." General Singh's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Then I suggest you do so now, in public, with her consent." Patel hesitated. The crowd was watching now, phones raised, whispers rising like wind. Marta stood motionless, face pale. Her breath came in shallow waves, each one costing more effort. Rao reached into Marta's spilled bag, retrieving her wallet with awkward care. He flipped through the contents, found her ID, his fingers trembling just slightly. Her name's Marta Vasilyev, lives 2 stops from here. Her record's clean, sir," he said, voice pitched to be heard by the crowd as well as the general. Singh nodded, turning to Marta. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She managed a nod, but her voice was no more than a whisper. "My mother, she's waiting." Singh's expression softened. "And your groceries?" Marta looked at the scattered apples, the bread now damp from the rain. "It doesn't matter," she said, but her eyes betrayed her. He knelt, gathering the apples with the same care he'd once used handling unexploded shells. "It does matter," he said gently. "Small things always matter." He stood, offering her the bag. "I am sorry for what you've experienced today. Sometimes in the pursuit of routine, we forget the cost of doubt." Patel cleared his throat, trying to recover authority. "Sir, we were only following protocol." Singh faced him squarely. "Protocol is meant to protect the innocent, not humiliate them. If you forget that, you forget the purpose of the badge." The crowd shifted, murmurs swelling. A woman from the newsstand, who'd watched Marta each morning for months, stepped forward. "She's always helping," she said, voice shaking. "Buys flowers for the sick, carries groceries for old Mrs. Kapoor. She never causes trouble." A man in a station vest added, "She gave me her umbrella last winter when I was soaked. She's no criminal." The crowd, emboldened, found its voice. One by one, people came forward with small stories, an act of kindness here, a word of comfort there. The city, once a silent jury, became a chorus. Patel's face reddened. Rao lowered his eyes. "We're sorry, ma'am," Rao said softly, unlocking the cuffs. "Truly, this shouldn't have happened." Marta flexed her wrists, red marks blooming on her skin. She nodded, lips pressed together in an effort not to cry. Singh turned back to the crowd, raising his voice just enough. "Strength isn't measured by how many you can restrain, but by how many you choose to protect. The true test of community is not how it treats the powerful, but how it cares for the vulnerable." A hush fell, even the rain seemed to listen. Then, with the dignity that had never truly left her, Marta straightened. The crowd, once strangers, now stood as witnesses and supporters. The woman from the newsstand pressed a bag of bruised oranges into Marta's hands. "For your mother," she whispered. The officers, chastened, melted into the background. The people of the station closed ranks around Marta, some apologizing, some simply standing near, their presence an apology of its own. Singh offered Marta his arm. "Let me see you home." She hesitated, then took it, her hand still trembling. As they walked through the station, the crowd parted, not out of fear, but respect. Outside, the rain had faded to mist. Buses hissed, taxis splashed through puddles. The city resumed its rhythm. But something was different. The people who had watched Marta's humiliation now watched her walk away with her head high and with a general at her side. As they reached the street, Singh paused. "There will be an inquiry," he promised her. "This isn't the end." Marta nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for me, for seeing." He smiled, a weary but genuine curve of his mouth. Sometimes all it takes is one person to remind a city what it means to be human. As Marta disappeared into the crowd, Singh remained a moment longer, watching the station, the city wake up to itself. He saw the officers return to their patrol, heads bowed. He saw the bystanders disperse but not forget. He saw in the soft morning light that quiet acts could sometimes turn the tide. And as he turned to go, a thought lingered. Perhaps the greatest strength is not in command, but in compassion. Not in leading armies, but in helping a single soul find her way home. The city was a different place after that morning. Word of Marta's arrest and General Singh's intervention spread through the neighborhoods like a slow-burning fire one that couldn't be put out with any official statement or half-hearted apology. In the days that followed, the train station became more than a waypoint. It became the epicenter of a quiet reckoning. Marta's life was still a mosaic of small tasks, caring for her mother, working double shifts, keeping her head down. But something had changed in the way people looked at her. The newsstand vendor began saving the best apples for her. The porter offered to help with groceries. The children who once darted past her with careless laughter now stopped to say hello. There was a new current in the air, part solidarity, part unease. But for every gesture of support, there was a ripple of resistance. The officers who had handcuffed Marta were under scrutiny, their actions dissected in the press and in hushed conversations at the corner cafe. Their superiors issued statements about protocol and community trust, but the words felt thin, insubstantial. The city's jury was awake now, and it wanted answers. General Singh watched the aftermath with a soldier's patience. He knew that change, like any campaign, was won not in grand gestures, but through 1,000 small acts of persistence. He began to investigate not just the incident, but the patterns that led to it. He visited the station during crowded rush hours and quiet afternoons, observing the officers, the commuters, the silent machinery of suspicion that turned people into suspects. One evening, Singh sat with Marta at her kitchen table. It was a humble space, bare walls, chipped mugs, her mother's medicines lined up in careful order. The general's presence filled the room with a sense of calm, but also a tension, as if both were aware they stood at the edge of something larger. "Tell me," he said, his voice gentle, "has anything like this ever happened before?" Marta hesitated, tracing the rim of her cup. "Not like this, but there are always eyes, always questions. Sometimes I feel like I carry my guilt on the outside, even when I've done nothing." Singh nodded. It's not your guilt. It's their fear. Systems get used to seeing danger where there is only difference. He began to ask around quietly, methodically. He spoke to other commuters who had witnessed the arrest. Some were reluctant. I didn't see much, or they'd say. Just a woman and some police. But as Singh pressed, details emerged. The hurried way the officers acted, the lack of real investigation, the way the crowd's silence had made everything feel inevitable. The general met with the precinct supervisor, a man named Inspector Choudhury. They sat across from each other in an office lined with commendations and certificates, the city's skyline framed in glass behind them. With respect, sir, Choudhury said, my men acted according to our guidelines. Singh leaned forward, his gaze steady. Your guidelines nearly destroyed an innocent woman's life. Have you reviewed the footage? Listened to the witnesses? Choudhury's jaw tightened. We're conducting an internal review. Singh's voice was low, but carried the weight of command. A review is not enough. The city is watching. If you do not change, the city will change you. Word of Singh's investigation spread. Some officers resented the scrutiny, whispering about outsiders meddling in their business. Others, younger and less certain, began to question their own habits. Maybe we should look twice, one rookie murmured to his partner while checking tickets the next morning. Maybe it's not always as simple as the checklist. Meanwhile, resistance was mounting from the old guard, those who saw any challenge to their authority as a threat. At a late-night meeting in the station's break room, a sergeant spoke in hushed tones. We can't let one mistake ruin our careers. If we show weakness now, we'll lose control. A younger officer, Rao, shifted uneasily. But what if we were wrong? The sergeant's voice sharpened. Protocol is there for a reason. We follow it, or chaos follows us. Out in the city, the community's resistance took quieter forms. Flyers appeared on lampposts. Who is safe when anyone can be next? At the bakery, Marta found a note tucked inside a bag of rolls. We saw what happened. We're with you. There were whispers of a petition, of a call for accountability. General Singh, seeing the lines being drawn, decided to act publicly. He arranged a community meeting at the station's main hall, inviting officers, commuters, and local leaders. The hall filled with a mix of anger, fear, and hope. He stood at the front, his uniform simple, his voice unwavering. We are all citizens of this city. We all want safety, but safety built on fear is no safety at all. When we stop seeing each other as neighbors and start seeing threats, we lose what makes this city worth living in. One by one, people spoke. An elderly man recounted his own wrongful stop years before. A shopkeeper described the chill that spread through her store after Marta's arrest. The officers listened, some defensive, some ashamed. Marta spoke last, her voice quiet but clear. I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking to be seen, to be heard, to be believed when I say, I am not your enemy, I am your neighbor. The meeting ended not with applause but with silence, a silence that felt like a reset, a chance to start again. In the days that followed, Singh's investigation bore fruit. The precinct announced new training, new protocols. Officers were assigned to community outreach. The city council opened an inquiry into police practices at transit hubs. But resistance did not vanish. There were still hard looks from certain officers, still muttered complaints at the back of the room. Change is never clean. It is always a negotiation between old habits and new hope. At home, Marta felt the difference most sharply. Her mother, once anxious every time Marta left, now watched her go with a trembling pride. You did not want this, Galina said one evening, but maybe the city needed you to be seen. Marta smiled, her eyes shining. I just wanted to go home. The city was far from perfect. There would be more mistakes, more moments of fear and suspicion. But for the first time, Marta felt that her quiet strength had become something larger, a current running through the city, gathering force. General Singh, watching the city from his office window, allowed himself a rare small smile. Resistance, he knew, was not just opposition. Sometimes it was the beginning of something better. The news of what happened at the station didn't just echo through the marble halls and rain-soaked streets. It rippled, quietly but inexorably, through the very heart of the city. Marta, once invisible in the crowd, was suddenly the name on everyone's lips. Her arrest, the general's intervention, the hushed apology, it all became a story retold in barbershops, over coffee counters, in late-night shifts at the bakery. But the question that pulsed beneath every retelling wasn't whether a mistake had been made. It was, what would happen next? Marta returned home that day to find her mother sitting by the window, watching the city with anxious eyes. When Marta entered, red marks still fresh on her wrists, groceries abandoned, Galina pressed her daughter's hands to her lips. "You came back," she whispered, trembling. "You always come back." But something in Marta had shifted. She moved more carefully, listened more intently to the sounds outside. Footsteps, voices, the city's heartbeat. Fear lingered, but so did something else. A strange new awareness, as if the world had cracked open and let in a sliver of possibility. The next morning, a knock rattled the apartment door. Marta braced herself. Old habits die hard. But when she opened it, she found Tomasz, the porter from the station, standing awkwardly with a box of bruised pears. "I should have spoken up," he said, eyes downcast. "You helped me when my brother was sick. I didn't know what to do yesterday." Marta managed a small smile. "Thank you for coming," she said, accepting the fruit. "It means more than you think." Words spread. The newsstand vendor slipped Marta an envelope with small bills and a note. For medicine, for hope. At the bakery, her boss insisted she take extra bread home. Even the children, sensing a shift, left her chalk drawings on the stoop. Pictures of a woman with a green coat and a golden heart. But not all the reactions were so warm. From the police, there was a strained silence. Some officers watched Marta with guilt, others with unease. Protocols were reviewed, memos circulated, but apologies stayed behind closed doors. The city's old wounds of suspicion, of fear, did not heal overnight. General Singh, meanwhile, became an unlikely symbol. His actions at the station were recounted with admiration and sometimes resentment. At the local cafe, he found himself the subject of whispered conversations. "You hear about the general?" one patron murmured. "Stood up for that woman, embarrassed the whole force." "Or saved them from a lawsuit," another countered. "Depends on who's telling it." Singh ignored the gossip, focusing instead on outreach. He visited the community center, spoke at neighborhood meetings, and most importantly, listened. He heard stories like Marta's everywhere. Small injustices, silent wounds, the ache of being unseen. Each time he asked a simple question. What would it take to make you feel safe here? At first, people hesitated. But as Marta's story spread, others found the courage to speak tentatively, then boldly. A mother described being stopped for no reason in a grocery store. A shopkeeper recalled his son's run-in with officers late at night. A group of teenagers, usually invisible to adults, recounted how they learned to keep their hands in sight, voices soft, whenever uniforms appeared. Singh took notes, his face grave. "We can't change everything overnight," he said, "but we can begin." The city council called a special meeting. At first it was sparsely attended. These things rarely changed anything. But as the agenda reached Marta's case, the room began to fill. Neighbors, business owners, elders, and children packed the hall, their faces tight with anticipation. The chairperson called Marta to speak. She stood, hands trembling, but her voice was steady. "I am not here for revenge," she began. "I am here because I want to live in a city where people are seen for who they are, not for what someone fears they might be. I want my mother to feel safe when I leave in the morning. I want children to grow up trusting the people who are supposed to protect them." A hush settled over the room. Then Tomasz stood, followed by the newsstand vendor. One by one, people spoke about Marta, about their own quiet struggles, about the need for change. A police sergeant, face flushed, rose to respond. "We made a mistake," he admitted, voice thick with humility. "We need to do better. We need to listen." Applause broke the tension, not raucous, but sincere. That night, the city felt different. At the bakery, customers lingered to talk. At the pharmacy, Marta's prescription was filled without question, and the pharmacist added a note: "You are not alone." But not everyone welcomed the change. In the shadows, resentment simmered. Some officers muttered about being undermined. Others, emboldened by the general's example, reached out to the community, but old habits die hard. Singh convened a meeting with the police. He spoke with the authority of experience, but also with vulnerability. "I've seen what fear does to a city," he told them. "It turns neighbors into suspects, kindness into risk. We have a choice. We can double down on our mistakes, or we can open the door to something better." A young officer, eyes brimming, asked, "How do we start?" "By seeing," Singh replied. "By listening. By remembering that every person you stop is someone's Marta." Days passed, and the city began to change in small but visible ways. Street murals appeared, images of clasped hands, of open eyes, of Marta's green coat. Community patrols were organized not to police, but to watch out for neighbors. At the station, the old fear was met by new voices: shopkeepers, janitors, students, all willing to speak up when something didn't seem right. Marta found herself at the center of this quiet revolution. She didn't seek the spotlight, but she accepted it when it came. She spoke at schools, at churches, at community events, always returning to the same theme. Kindness is like rain. It falls on everyone, even those who never ask for it. Her mother, Galina, grew stronger. She took comfort in the steady stream of visitors, the food left at their door, the laughter of children in the hallway. "You change things," she told Marta one night, "not by fighting, but by standing." But resistance remained. One evening, as Marta walked home, she found graffiti on her door. "Go back where you came from." The words stung, but they did not break her. Instead, she painted over them with a single phrase: "We belong." The next morning, she found flowers left beside the door. A note unsigned read, "Thank you for reminding us." At the next city council meeting, the crowd was even larger. The chairperson announced new community police initiatives, diversity training, and, most importantly, a promise to review protocols for every stop, every search. Marta was asked to speak again. This time her voice was stronger. "We are not asking for miracles, just for a city that sees us, listens to us, and believes that we can be better together." As she finished, the crowd rose, not in roaring applause, but in a standing acknowledgement of something rare: unity. General Singh closed the meeting with a simple statement: "Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet woman in a green coat, refusing to disappear." The city was still itself messy, unpredictable, alive with old wounds and new hopes. But as Marta walked through the station the next morning, people nodded, smiled, even stopped to talk. The officers on duty met her gaze, some with apology, others with respect. For the first time, Marta felt truly seen. And as the trains thundered in and out, as the city moved forward, Marta knew the story wasn't over, not for her, not for anyone. The crowd had spoken, and what they said through kindness, through courage, through the simple act of standing together was this: "We are more than our fears. We are a community, and we are at last awake." The rain that had haunted the city all week was gone, replaced by a new morning sharp with sunlight and possibility. Marta's world, once so small, a handful of faces at the bakery, a mother's cough echoing in a cramped apartment, felt wider now, as if every stranger she passed might carry a secret or an apology. The station had changed too. The officers who had handcuffed her no longer swaggered through crowds. Now they moved with a kind of wary humility. Word had spread: the general's intervention, the crowd's awakening, the mistakes made, and more importantly, the mistakes owned. But the city's real transformation was slower, quieter. It began in the spaces between headlines. In the careful way a bus driver greeted Marta by name, in the newsstand vendor's refusal to accept her coins, in the cluster of children who waited for her each morning, eager to show her their latest chalk masterpiece, the city was learning to see itself again, one small gesture at a time. The station's investigation, once a defensive shuffle of paperwork, became something else entirely. Inspector Rao, the younger officer, was the first to break the silence. He arrived at Marta's apartment one evening, hat in hand, his uniform looking less like armor and more like an apology. "I came to return these," he said, offering the battered green tote and the scattered groceries, now neatly repacked. "And to say I'm sorry." Marta let him in, her mother watching from the kitchen. Rao's voice trembled as he explained how a description had been stretched to fit a prejudice, how protocol had replaced judgment, how easy it was to mistake procedure for truth. "We were wrong," he finished, twisting his cap in his hands. "Not just about you, but about what our job is meant to protect." Marta listened, her face unreadable. When he finished, she set the apples on the table and poured him tea. "Sit," she said quietly. "If you want to do better, start by listening." They talked for an hour. Marta told him about her mother's illness, the bakery, the loneliness that comes from being unseen. Rao listened, and when he left, his step was a little steadier, his eyes a little clearer. Meanwhile, General Singh was not content to let apologies do the work of change. He pressed for a full inquiry, public, transparent, and driven by the truth Marta and others like her had lived. The city council convened in a chamber packed with neighbors, business owners, and commuters who had watched Marta's arrest and now demanded answers. Testimonies poured in. The newsstand vendor spoke first, her voice trembling as she described the moment she almost looked away. Tomasz, the porter, admitted to his own regret. "She helped me for months. I let fear keep me silent. Never again." But it wasn't just guilt that filled the room. Voices rose in defense of Marta and of every unseen face in the city. A mother recounted the day Marta found her lost son and sat with him until help arrived. A teenager confessed that he'd once stolen bread, only to find an extra roll in his bag and a note. "Feed your family first. The world is hard enough." General Singh listened, then stood. "This city is not built from stone and steel alone. It is built from hands that help, voices that speak, and the courage to admit when we are wrong. If we want to be better, we must start now, not just for Marta, but for all of us." The council voted unanimous. New guidelines were passed. Identification must be checked before detainment. Officers required to undergo empathy and de-escalation training. A community advisory board formed to review complaints. It was not perfect, but it was a beginning. The ripple spread. The next week, Marta returned to the station not as a suspect, but as a guest of honor. The general met her at the door, flanked by the mayor and the officers who had once seen her, only as a file in a database. This time, the station was alive with color. Banners welcoming Marta, bouquets of wildflowers, children holding handmade signs. "Thank you, Marta. We see you." The mayor spoke, then General Singh, who turned the microphone over to Marta. She looked out at the crowd, heart pounding. For a moment the words stuck, but then she remembered her father's voice. "Kindness is like rain. It falls on everyone, even those who never ask for it." She spoke simply. "I am not special. I am just someone who tried to help when she could. All I ever wanted was to go home without fear." She paused, scanning the crowd. "But now I see that home is more than four walls. It's the faces that greet you, the hands that reach out, the voices that stand up when it matters." The applause was thunderous, not because she was famous, but because she was finally seen. In the weeks that followed, Marta's life blossomed in small but significant ways. She was offered a new job at the community center, organizing support for immigrants and the elderly. Her mother's health stabilized, buoyed by visits from neighbors and children who brought soup and stories. The officers who had wronged her became her allies, Rao in particular, who now helped with community patrols, and even joined Marta's knitting group at the center. The general made good on his promise to keep watch, not as a distant authority, but as a friend. But the real truth that emerged was not in the headlines or speeches. It was in the quiet mornings. The way Marta walked through the city, no longer flinching at uniforms, the way people smiled and nodded, not out of obligation, but recognition. It was in the way the city itself learned to breathe again, not just as a place to live, but as a community that could change, could apologize, could grow. One evening, as Marta closed up the community center, she found a note taped to the door. In careful handwriting, it read, "Thank you for reminding us that strength is quiet, that courage is ordinary, and that home is something we build together. Your city." Marta folded the note and pressed it to her chest, feeling the truth of it settle in her bones. On the anniversary of that morning at the station, the city held a small ceremony, not for the general, not for the council, but for Marta, and for every person who had ever been unseen. The general spoke, his words simple and true. "We are not defined by our mistakes, but by how we choose to correct them. Let this city be known not for what went wrong, but for how we made it right." Marta stood beside him as the crowd sang an old folk song, voices rising in harmony. Her mother wept quietly, surrounded by friends. As the sun set over the city, Marta looked at the faces around her, some familiar, some new, and realized that the truth was both harder and more beautiful than she'd ever imagined. That redemption was possible, that strength could be gentle, and that sometimes the most ordinary hands could change everything. The storm that had threatened to swallow the city finally broke, not with violence but with a quiet, collective exhale, a dawn that felt different, gentler, as if Riverstone itself had been washed clean. The shadow vipers were gone. Their reign ended not by brute force alone, but by the stubborn hope of a town that had learned to stand together. Peggy Thompson, who had once been a footnote in her own town, a 90-year-old woman with a past no one quite believed, awoke to the sound of hammers and laughter. Through her kitchen window, she watched as former gang members and veterans worked side by side, rebuilding what had been burned. The old Mason Hardware, Diana's Diner, even the battered VA Center all buzzed with new life. The ghosts of fear that had haunted the streets had been chased away by the noise of progress and the music of second chances. It wasn't easy. Some wounds ran deep. There were still glances of suspicion, nerves that flinched at the rumble of a motorcycle or the sight of a stranger in a leather vest. But now those vests bore new patches. Riverstone Community Watch, Veterans Guard Civilian Auxiliary. A sign that change, once begun, could be finished if people believed, even just a little, in each other. Peggy moved through the town like she always had, steady, unhurried, her cane tapping a rhythm on the sidewalks. But now she was greeted by name at every corner. Tom Mason, his store almost rebuilt, waved her over to show off his new security system. Diana pressed a free coffee into her hand. On the house, for the woman who taught us all about courage. Children painted murals on the walls that had once been scarred by fire, their bright colors a promise that fear would never again claim this place. At the new Veterans Guard headquarters, the old factory transformed Iron Jack Morrison oversaw the mentorship program, his voice booming with purpose. "If you wore the Viper's patch, you're not our enemy. You're our neighbor. You want to earn trust? Start with a hammer, start with a broom. We build together, or not at all." Diesel, once Havoc's right hand, now trained as civilian coordinator, moving through the ranks of former outlaws with a quiet authority that came from regret turned into resolve. The work was slow, but every nail hammered, every window replaced, was a small act of redemption. The first to volunteer for the hardest jobs were often the men who had been feared the most. A silent apology, hammered into wood and glass. Sarah Chan organized the paperwork, the grants, the new community restoration fund. She met with city officials and visiting journalists, always repeating the same lesson. Redemption isn't a miracle, It's a decision, and it's made every morning. One afternoon as the sun warmed the town square, a crowd gathered for the unveiling of a new memorial. It wasn't for the battle, or even for the victory. It was for the transformation, a simple stone carved with the words, "Strength through unity, peace through understanding." Peggy was asked to speak. She gripped the podium, her hands still strong despite the years, her voice carrying across the crowd like a bell. "A year ago, we stood on the edge of something dark. We could have chosen vengeance. We could have fought fire with fire. Instead, we chose something harder, to believe in the power of change, to offer second chances, to build a town that's stronger because we stood together, not because we stood apart." She looked out at the faces veterans, former Vipers, business owners, children all watching, all change. Riverstone isn't just a place, it's a promise that the past doesn't have to own you, that people can change, and that a community is only as strong as the kindness it offers its weakest. We are not defined by fear or by what was done to us. We are defined by what we do next. The applause was quiet at first, then grew, spreading through the crowd like sunlight. After the ceremony, Peggy found herself approached by James, once known as Snake Tattoo, now a leader in the new community watch. His old vest was patched over with the emblem of Riverstone's rebirth. "I never thought I'd see the day," he said, voice rough. "Thank you for giving us a chance, Miss Peggy. I thought I was beyond saving." Peggy smiled, her eyes shining. "No one's beyond saving, James. Sometimes all it takes is someone to believe you can change." Throughout the day, Peggy saw scenes that would have been unthinkable a year before. Diana's Diner, packed with veterans and reformed outlaws sharing stories and coffee. Tom Mason's hardware store, busy with former Vipers learning carpentry and repair. Children helping repaint the community center, their laughter echoing off the new walls. Iron Jack found Peggy on her porch as the sun set. "You did more than stop a gang, Peggy. You changed the way we see ourselves." She shook her head, watching the children play in the street, the motorcycles rolling gently past, now symbols of hope instead of fear. "I just reminded people of what they already knew. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with fists, but with forgiveness." Sarah joined them, carrying a folder thick with paperwork. "The state's interested in our program," she announced, a tired smile on her face. "They want to know how we did it, how a town found a better way." "Tell them it wasn't about programs or policies," Peggy replied. "It was about believing people can change if you give them the chance." As the weeks passed, the changes took root. The Veterans Guard headquarters became a community center, offering job training, counseling, and support for anyone ready to leave the past behind. The old Shadow Viper warehouse was renovated into affordable housing and a small business incubator. The memorial in the square became a place for gatherings, for remembering, for starting again. Marshall, the mercenary commander, was released early for cooperation and came to visit. He approached Peggy with respect, offering a handshake. "I've spent my life fighting for the highest bidder. You taught me about fighting for something better." "You're welcome here," Peggy told him, "if you're willing to build, not just protect." As for Havoc, his name faded into rumor, a warning told to children, power taken through fear never lasts. The men and women who had once followed him now built their lives on different ground, some in Riverstone, some elsewhere, all marked by the lesson that real respect is earned. A year passed. Riverstone blossomed. The community center buzzed with activity. Businesses thrived. The partnership between veterans and reformed gang members became a model for other towns. The fear that had once ruled the streets was replaced by a quiet pride. On the anniversary of the day, everything changed. The town gathered once more in the square. Peggy, now 91, sat with Iron Jack and Sarah, watching the sunset paint the town gold. A group of children cycled past, escorted by veterans, not for protection, but because they were now part of the family. "They call it the Riverstone miracle," Sarah said. "It wasn't a miracle," Peggy answered, eyes sparkling with wisdom. "It was just people discovering their better selves. Sometimes they just need someone to believe they can. As night fell, the lights of Riverstone glowed, warm, inviting, alive. The darkness that once held fear now held only promise. Peggy, the woman who had been handcuffed in a train station and changed everything, knew the real victory was not in defeating an enemy, but in helping everyone, herself included, find the courage to become something better. And as the town drifted into peaceful sleep, she smiled, knowing that sometimes the greatest battles are not the ones we fight against others, but the ones we fight for them. 1 year had passed since Riverstone stood on the edge of a knife. The town that had once gone to bed with locked doors and restless hearts now woke each morning to the sound of hope, sometimes as faint as a distant engine, sometimes as bold as children's laughter echoing down Main Street. The old wounds had not vanished. On some quiet nights, you could still find Peggy Thompson at her porch, listening for the rumble of motorcycles and remembering that courage was not the absence of fear, but the will to stand anyway. But the fear had changed shape. Where once it prowled in the alleys and lingered in every shadow, now it was only a memory, a lesson, not a prison. The Veterans Guard had become more than a line of defense. Their headquarters in the old factory buzzed with new purpose. Job training, counseling, a community kitchen where veterans and former outlaws chopped onions side by side. The old gang vests now bore new patches: Riverstone Community Watch, Auxiliary Volunteer. The line between us and them had blurred, not through miracle, but through the messy, stubborn work of forgiveness. Diana's Diner, once a place to watch trouble unfold behind a coffee cup, had become a daily parliament. Early risers swapped stories with men who once rode under the Shadow Viper's flag. Sarah Chan, the Gulf War vet with paperwork and steel in equal measure, ran a mentorship program that was drawing interest from towns across the state. It isn't about erasing the past, she'd tell new arrivals. It's about choosing what comes next. Tom Mason's hardware store flourished, rebuilt with the help of hands that once broke its windows. Sometimes on slow afternoons, Tom would watch the street outside, remembering the day they'd all stood together, unafraid for the first time in months. "We thought we needed protection," he'd say to anyone who'd listen. "Turns out what we needed was each other." Peggy, now 91, still took her coffee at the corner booth of Diana's. She watched as Iron Jack Morrison, his silver hair now shot through with more white than gray, led a parade of motorcycles past the window, some bearing the old patches, some the new. She remembered the fear in their eyes, the anger, the uncertainty. She remembered the fire, the night they rebuilt together, the morning she'd stood in the square and told them, "Strength isn't about what you can take, it's about what you can give back." James, once snake tattoo, now just James, sat across from her, fidgeting with a folder full of job applications. "We've got 3 more starting next week," he said. "Never thought I'd be the one teaching people how to run a business instead of how to run from a fight." Peggy smiled, warmth softening the lines of her face. "Everyone's good at something. Sometimes you just need someone to believe you can be good at something better." Out on the street, children rode bikes in a pack, trailing behind the motorcycles like ducklings behind their mother. The town had found its rhythm again, one built not on fear, but on belonging. Havoc, the man who once tried to rule Riverstone by fear, was gone, serving time for what he'd done, his name spoken less with anger now than with pity. Diesel, his old lieutenant, was now a civilian coordinator for the Community Watch, teaching the next generation that real power came from service, not control. Marshall, the mercenary commander, had kept his word from that day in the holding cell. Upon release, he'd signed up as a consultant, not for money, but for a chance to be part of something that felt for once like it mattered. Sarah's program gained national attention. Riverstone became a blueprint for other towns trying to heal old wounds, proof that community wasn't about erasing scars, but wearing them together, out in the open, until they lost their sting. The memorial in the square was simple: a ring of stone, a plaque that read, "Strength through unity, peace through understanding." On the anniversary of the day Riverstone changed, the town gathered under the fading sun. Veterans, former Vipers, business owners, children, each had a story, each had a stake. Peggy stood at the podium, looking out over the crowd. She didn't speak as a hero, just as someone who'd refused to let fear have the last word. "A year ago," she began, "we faced a choice. We could have fought back with fists and anger. We could have walked away, left the town to its ghosts. But we chose something harder. We chose to believe in each other, even when it would have been easier to give up." She looked at James, at Iron Jack, at Sarah, at Tom, at the faces lit golden by the last light of day. Riverstone isn't perfect. We still make mistakes. But we learned something together, that the greatest strength isn't in the walls we build to keep each other out, but in the bridges we build to let each other in. She paused, letting the silence deepen, letting the words take root. We're not here to celebrate the end of a war. We're here to honor the beginning of something better. What started with one phone call, with one act of courage, became a story all of us can claim. Not just survival, but transformation. Applause rose, not thunderous, but steady, like the heartbeat of a town that had found itself again. Later, as the sky deepened to indigo and the street lamps blinked on, Peggy sat on her porch with Iron Jack and Sarah. The motorcycles that rolled by now blended with the sounds of laughter and music, not fear. "You know," Iron Jack mused, "I never thought I'd see the day when veterans and outlaws would barbecue together." Sarah grinned. "You never saw what Peggy could do with a phone call either." Peggy sipped her coffee, her gaze far away. "It wasn't the call that changed things. It was the answer. Sometimes people just need to be reminded they can." A group of teenagers rode past on bicycles, flanked by veterans wearing community watch patches. No one looked over their shoulder. The light in Peggy's eyes lingered on the horizon, the way it always did after a storm had finally passed. Riverstone was far from perfect, but it was whole, and that, Peggy thought, was enough. So that's the story of how a quiet town on the brink found its courage and remembered how to stand together. The story of second chances, of unlikely allies, and of the woman who refused to give up on herself, on her neighbors, or even on those who once called themselves her enemies. But now I want to hear your story. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below. I read everyone, and your words matter more than you know. If this story touched your heart, even a little, subscribe to the channel so you never miss another tale of courage, redemption, and the quiet power of kindness. There's always another chapter waiting. Thank you for spending your time with me. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never underestimate the power of a gentle heart. Before you go, take a moment and tell us, where are you watching from, and what part of this story stayed with you? I read every comment, and your words matter more than you know. If this journey through courage, redemption, and the quiet power of kindness touched your heart, tap the subscribe button now. Tomorrow I'll be back with another true story, one that might just change how you see the world or how you see yourself. And if you know someone who could use a reminder that one voice, one gentle act can change everything, share this video with them. Because together we're building a community that believes in second chances, brave hearts, and new beginnings, no matter how unlikely they seem. There's always another chapter waiting. Thank you for spending your time with me. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never underestimate the power of a gentle hand in a noisy world.